Hey everybody, and welcome back to FSi DFS. I'm McKinley412. We're just looking at the early slate for this video. Sorry I didn't get out to you last night. I'd like to do the early videos the night before just to give people a little bit more time to build. But honestly, just plumb forgot. So here we go. We're looking at the early slate. Let's just dive right in. Ryan and Gallen, those are your top two pitchers on the slate. It's going to be a little bit difficult to jam both of those guys in if you do want to go with my favorite stack on the day, which is going to be Texas against Oviedo. But there is some value to be found on the slate, but still could be a little bit difficult, especially if you want to throw in a guy like Corey Seager or another top Texas bat who are both over 5K. It's going to get real tight real quick with the salary. So Ryan or Gallen, who do you pick? I have a slight lean towards Ryan here going up against San Francisco. Just a little bit better of a matchup, a little bit better strikeout rate. And, it's not a knock on Gallen at all. Gallen has been phenomenal this season. I just think that, he's just in a tougher matchup on the road. It's a West Coast team playing an East Coast game. I know it's not as big of a deal in baseball as it is in like the NFL and everything, but still it's something to think about. So I do lean the edge of Ryan over Gallen in this situation. If you want to come at me with an argument or a statement that Gallen is over Ryan, I would certainly listen to it. But for me, on this slate, given the matchups, given the timing, all that stuff, Ryan over Gallen. Here's the sheet, actually. Here's a sheet, Ryan over Gallen. In that mid-tier, DeSclafani, Kopech, and Perez. DeSclafani is 8.6K. He's a little bit more expensive than the other two guys. Kopech definitely has the higher strikeout rate of any of the other guys that are in this mid-tier. DeSclafani and Perez are kind of in that high teens, like 18, 19% strikeout rate, whereas Kopech is at like 24 to 25% strikeout rate. So big difference. However, Kopech is facing Cleveland, who has the lowest strikeout rate as a team against right-handed pitching in the entire league by a pretty wide margin too. They make contact with the ball. On the other side of things, DeSclafani is facing Minnesota, who strikes out the second most in the entire league against right-handed pitching. So DeSclafani should see a slightly better than average performance in terms of strikeouts. Kopech slightly worse. And honestly, I just kind of like the DeSclafani matchup just a little bit better too. So we're going to go with DeSclafani. Like, his walk rate is down. His home run rate allowed is down on the season. So that's fantastic. Kopech on the other side, he walks a lot of guys. His walk rate is through the roof this season. He's been better the past couple of starts, but it's still alarming when your guy has a walk rate in the 13% range. Not good at all. Perez, I'm not saying he's a bad play at all. Totally fine. Don't mind him at 7.9K going up against Pittsburgh. Their offense has certainly settled down as we've gone throughout the season here. So if you want to go with Perez, I'd certainly listen to it. But that's kind of how I have them ranked in this mid-tier. Cheap and fade. I really don't have any interest in these guys down here. I'm definitely going to keep it more towards the tops in my builds and kind of in my player pool. But I keep a way smaller player pool than most people do. But sticking near the top for me. But if you do go down to the cheap tier, I think Bialik going up against Milwaukee is going to be my favorite guy. He's been fine so far this season in his 4 starts. He had one really horrendous start against Seattle. But his other 3 have been okay. His price tag is creeping up a little bit, but he is still sub 7K with some strikeout rate going up against a nice Milwaukee team. So I would put him kind of as my favorite. Quantrill, he just doesn't really strike out many guys, but he is going up against the White Sox, and what's been the joke for the past 2 years? It's like the White Sox on paper are phenomenal, but they're just the kings of disappointment in the baseball world. So maybe he can get something going here against the White Sox. Don't have any interest in Suarez. Don't have any interest in Oviedo. Hauser, just a toughish matchup going up against Houston. I know there are some strikeouts in the bottom of that lineup, but he's just kind of there. Again, I'm sticking with the high tier and the mid tier in terms of my pitching player pool. I don't have too much interest down in the cheap side of things, but if you end up there, this is where I rank them. Going towards the bats, Texas, Arizona, Minnesota. Those are my 3 favorite stacks on this slate. Texas, I think they're the highest implied run total on the slate as well. Doesn't always correlate, with them being a favorite, but Texas is my favorite stack on the slate. Got a lot of left-handed bats that we do like. Seager and Lowe, those are going to be your first 2 that you jam in. Seager's going to be the first and kind of probably my favorite overall play on the entire slate. Maybe not. There might be another guy who's first base eligible, who I like a little bit more. But Seager, Lowe, I even love Heim, 4.1K. Honestly, there's just so many Texas bats. It doesn't matter lefty or right-handed matchups. I kind of like lefty. I kind of like Texas as a whole. They're just kind of expensive when you just kind of break it all down. 4 guys above 4.8K, and then you got Lowe and Heim above 4K still. So they're expensive. You're not going to get a Gallon and Ryan combination if you do a big stack of Texas, but they're still a solid stack overall. Arizona, just talked about them going up against Suarez. Suarez is just yikes in his 2 starts so far this season, and then that Philadelphia bullpen has been such a disappointment overall on the season. So they've been a little bit better of late, but it's still a disappointment of a season for their bullpen. Christian Walker, he's kind of the guy I was hinting at before. His numbers against left-handed pitching are just unreal. He's been phenomenal. So he'd be the first guy that I'd be putting into your lineup. He does carry first base eligibility, obviously, but there's a handful of guys at first base that I do have interest in here today. So it does get a little tight in terms of who you want to go with. But Christian Walker, Ketel Marte, Gurriel, even if you want to throw in a cheap guy like Rivera at third base, who could be batting higher in the order, I wouldn't mind that play there either. Minnesota, I know I talked about how I do have some interest in DeSclafani, just because, he's a little bit lower on the walk rate, a little bit lower on the home run rate so far this season. But I really like these prices for Minnesota. Just super, super cheap, super affordable outside of Buxton. Joey Gallo, just speaking of another guy who has just mashing numbers against the opposing pitch hand, Joey Gallo is right there. Thankfully, he's got outfield eligibility, sub 4K. I think he's going to be a great play and kind of a popular play here today. Could be completely wrong. We'll see. But Kirilloff, another first base guy that I do have some interest in here. So that's just kind of the issue. I feel like there's a lot of first basemen on this slate that I do have a lot of intrigue in. In terms of GPP, we're going to go with Cleveland. Kopech mentioned his strikeout upside, and that's kind of where he's going to get his DFS points, and that's kind of how he escapes out of jams, is relying on that strikeout rate that he does have. But Cleveland, they are the lowest strikeout rate team in the entire league against right-handed pitching, so I do think that they could be a very intriguing GPP play and chase Kopech out early, get that weaker Chicago White Sox bullpen. Now, we've talked about it in the past. Cleveland is not like I'm going to mash 5-6 home runs as a team kind of offense. They, hit singles, they hit doubles, they're going to try to steal bases. That's just kind of how their offense is run. They just don't hit a whole lot of home runs. But still, if you're correlating and doing all that kind of stuff, I definitely think that they're a viable play in terms of GPP. Houston, right behind them. Cheap guys, Pittsburgh. I do think Pittsburgh's kind of intriguing going up against Perez. Intriguing in the sense that they're affordable and they're not a bad offense. I don't know what the public consensus is on Pittsburgh. I still think that they're a solid offense. I know they've definitely tapered off lately as compared to the offense that they had earlier on in the season. But I do have some interest in these Pittsburgh bats here. Going back to Cleveland, I was I know I'm forgetting something that I wanted to talk about for Cleveland. I don't know if you saw it in my brain churning there. But back to Cleveland. Another thing I like about them, not only, going up against Kopech, all that stuff, but a lot of their best bats are left-handed hitters who get the platoon split against Kopech or switch hitters. So you got guys like Jose Ramirez and Jimenez and Kwan, Naylor, Rosario, Bell. All these guys are left-handed bats. Brennan, if he's in there, 2.1K. A lot of their best bats are left-handers, so a little bit more interest in Cleveland in that regard. But again, this is kind of where the slate lands. I like Ryan over Gallon. DeSclafani would be my favorite mid-play. I love Walker, love Gallo. Corey Seager's probably going to be in there as well with some of my favorites, but you're down to 3.3K remaining. Go cheap at catcher, go cheap at third base, I think, and then you should be just fine in your builds. So hopefully this is able to help you out. Again, I apologize for getting it out a little bit later. I just forgot to make the video last night. So thanks for watching. As always, good luck in your contests, and we will see you tomorrow.